Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another episode of Jumah Nights. This week we'll be going over a book that is very, very close to my heart, Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali, the first book written in the history of Shi'ism that exposes the events that transpired after the martyrdom of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is part of the mission of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, to expose the crimes of Saqifa Bani Sa'ida. So let us get acquainted with this book and understand the information that Sulaym ibn Qays was trying to tell us. Ya li-Tharat al-Hussein. With regards to the history of this book, Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali, this is one of the first books to be written in Islam, let alone Shia and Sunni, but definitely the first book of the Shia that was ever written. Imam Sadiq ﷺ refers to it as Abjad al-Shia, the alphabet or the preliminary kind of book of the Shia that every Shia should have in their homes. And we're going to get to the narrations from the Imams with regards to this book later on. The context of the book is that Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali, one of the companions of the first four Imams, Imam Ali alayhi salam, Imam al-Hasan, Imam al-Hussein and Imam Zayn al-Abidin, and he also saw Imam al-Baqir alayhi salatu wasalam according to his account in his own book. We see that this individual saw that Rasulullah took the mithaq and he took the promise from all of the individuals during his time to follow the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam after his martyrdom, and they began to turn away from this promise. So Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali was the first work of journalism, the first work of hadith that aimed to expose the crimes of Saqifa Bani Sa'ida. So he began to write first-hand accounts of what he saw happening on the ground, where we have narrations from Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, from Salman, from Abu Dhar, from the companions that were actually there, and he himself was also actually there. So he was seeing what was happening in front of his eyes, and he was writing it down into this book, referred to as Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali. This book is so old that we see that there's narrations from each of the Imams after the writing of this book. So we have narrations with regards to it from Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, we have narrations with regards to it from Imam Sadiq, which we will go through inshallah in due time. But the conversation with regards to this book usually begins with the individual himself, Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali. Who was this individual? Because there are those that say that Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali was actually his name, and others say that this was a pen name for another one of the companions of Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, who would have written this book under a pen name. As for the research that I've depended on, he was Abu Sadiq, Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali al-Amiri al-Kufi, who was born 2 years prior to the hijrah of Rasulullah from Mecca to Medina. The historians mention that he was around 12 years old when Rasulullah was martyred, and he moved with Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam and stayed with him throughout his battles. And he witnessed the battle of Jamal, the battle of Siffin, and the battle of Nahrawan. He stayed with Amir Mu'mineen until he was eventually martyred in Kufa, and then he moved back to Medina, where he mentions he met Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, and he heard the sermon that he gave in Mina, and he also met the Imams that came after, Imam Zayn al-Abidin and Imam al-Baqir alayhi salatu wasalam. He eventually returned to Iraq, and he fled Iraq in the end because of persecution that he was going to face, and he fled to Iran, where he met an individual called Aban ibn Abi Ayyash, and he was the individual that he gave his book to, and he said, go and narrate my book, Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali. So the whole of the book, Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali, is narrated by Aban ibn Abi Ayyash. With regards to the contents of the book, we see that Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali speaks about the events that transpired in history in such a way that if a well-read Shi'i was to read it, they would go through the book from beginning to end, and they wouldn't be surprised at anything that they see, because this is what they would have heard from the time that they were children. They would know that this was the oppression that Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam faced, or Sayyidah Fatima faced, or Imam al-Hasan faced, or Imam al-Hussein faced. This is stuff that is very basic and is known by the Shia anyway. So many of the contexts of Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali is just as normal history that we know as children when we are Shia. Another thing about the contents of the narration is you have to bear in mind that this was written in the context of even the Khilafah of Amir Mu'mineen, or the Khilafah of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salatu wasalam. So there's a lot of narrations here that speak about things like political governance. How should a society run? How should a society be formed? Things that would be very, very important in the world of politics and the world of political science. You will remember on one of the episodes with After Maghrib, where we were speaking about Islamic governance, I quoted a narration from Amir al-Mu'mineen in Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali, where he mentions with regards to establishing a government and how the characteristics of that ruler should be. So we see that this book is not just a book of oppression. This is a book that has amazing information within it with regards to many different aspects of life and social life and political science, as well as many other things that we find in this book. It also contains important narrations with regards to theology and theological matters as well as, of course, historical documented facts after the death of or martyrdom of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sometimes when you see people speaking about Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali, they act as if there's stuff in it that is just completely different to the rest of our Hadith books. It's not like that at all. If you were to go through it, you would see that it's in the same trajectory with regards to what was happening after the events that happened after the martyrdom of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's no different. Even though there may be more detail that is mentioned in this book, because it was written solely with the purpose of giving that detail, you might not find that detail in other books, but it doesn't mean that it's completely new or doesn't match the trajectory of what we already know in Shia history. Another important thing that is mentioned in Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali is the details of the attack upon Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. And there's something that's very silly and disingenuous when the event of the attack on the door of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra is discussed. Because some people pretend as if Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali is the only source that mentions the attack on Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. They don't recognize that, wait a minute, there's actually many books in the history of Shi'ism that have mentioned this event. We see, for example, in Al-Kafi, we have a narration from Al-Kulayni, where he narrates from Imam Al-Kadhim alayhi salatu wasalam, where he says in volume 1 in Kitab al-Hujjah, in the chapter with regards to the birth of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, in the second narration, he narrates from Imam Al-Kadhim, he says, Inna Fatimata Siddiqatun Shahida. He says that Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra was a Siddiqa, that was her status as a lady, and she was a Shahida, she was a martyr. So we can see that is mentioned in Al-Kafi, our most important book of Hadith. It mentions that Sayyidah Fatima was a martyr. Then we have in Kamil al-Ziyarat. In Kamil al-Ziyarat, which is also one of our most authentic books, which we see Ibn Khulawayh, he authenticates all of the narrators that are in his book. And this was the well-known opinion taken by Al-Mirza al-Nuri and other scholars after him. He says in a narration, in a lengthy narration, from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, where he mentions where Rasulullah went to Mi'raj, and Allah is giving him information of what is going to happen to his family after him. He says, وَأَمَّا إِبْنَتُكَ فَتُظْلَمْ وَتُحْرَمْ وَيُؤْخَذْ حَقُّهَا غَصْبًا الَّذِي تَجْعَلُهُ لَهَا. He says that as for your daughter, Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, then she will be oppressed and her rights will be taken from her by force, those things that you gave to her. وَتُضْرَبْ وَهِيَ حَامِلٌ. And she will be struck while she is pregnant, in the state of pregnancy. وَيُدْخَلُ عَلَيْهَا وَعَلَى حَرِيمِهَا وَمَنْزِلِهَا بِغَيْرِ إِذْنٍ. And she will be entered upon without permission. Her house will be entered without permission. And then he carries on and he says, وَتُطْرَحُ مَا فِي بَطْنِهَا مِنَ الضَّرْبِ وَتَمُوتَ مِنْ ذَلِكَ الضَّرْبِ. He says that she will lose what is in her womb from the hit that is afflicted upon her, and that she will die from this hit. So we can see in Kamil al-Ziyarat and in Al-Kafi that it mentions the attack upon Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. It mentions that she will be killed as a shaheed. We see also in another book by Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari al-Shi'i, which is called Dala'il al-Imama, which is also a classical work of hadith. It also mentions the details of the shahada of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. So it is not just Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali that's being discussed when we talk about the attack upon Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. People pretend as if this is the only source that speaks about it. And they pretend as if Shaykh al-Saduq and Shaykh al-Tusi didn't mention that there was ijma' amongst the Shia. There was consensus and agreement amongst the Shia that Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra was killed and she miscarried her child due to this hit and the attack upon her door. This is ijma' of the Shia. People question the most silly things and they make all of the matter about this book, Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali. And in reality, is nothing to do with Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali. Kitab Sulaym is just the most detailed account of the attack upon Sayyidah Fatima Zahra. It's not the only source with regards to it, such that you can say Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali is a false book and it's a fabrication and it's a weak book, so we're not going to accept the attack of Sayyidah Fatima Zahra. That's not how it works. You would have to reject the narration of Al-Kafi. You'd have to reject the narrations of Kamil al-Ziyarat. You'd have to reject the book, the narration of Dalail al-Imama. You'd have to reject the Ijma' that was transmitted by Shaykh al-Saduq and Shaykh al-Tusi. This is the level of rejection you'd need to go through. You'd have to reject even narrations in Sunni books in order for you to reject the attack on Sayyidah Fatima Zahra's door. That's the extent that you'd have to go through. And at that point, it would just be a matter of your sincerity, of the fact that you don't want to believe it. And that's a completely different issue. If you don't want to believe it, you're free not to believe it. But don't pretend as if Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali is the only book that mentions the attack upon Sayyidah Fatima Zahra. With regards to controversial narrations or controversial content that is mentioned in this book, we see that there are some contentions from classical scholars and obviously contemporary scholars alike. So for example, there are two objections that are raised by Ibn al-Ghadairi, and we saw the objections of Ibn al-Ghadairi last week with regards to Tafsir Imam Hassan al-Askari, and he also has objections with regards to Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali. Ibn al-Ghadairi was known to be very harsh in his criticism, and of course, as I mentioned, his book itself is a weak transmission book, so we don't even know whether that book actually belongs to Ibn al-Ghadairi or not. And that opinion about his book not being proven in its transmission towards him is mentioned by Abu al-Qasim al-Khoi. But khair, he said with regards to a narration that is mentioned in Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali, that the narration says that there are 13 Imams. So he's saying that this book is fabricated because there's a narration in it that says that there are 13 Imams. This is not something that is strange. Of course, the most famous narrations are the ones about 12 Imams. But as we know, the chains of Imamah are many. We have the chain of 14 Imams, which is all 14 Ma'sumin. We have the chain of 12 Imams, which are the 12 Imams that are well known. And we have the chain of the 3 Imams, Muhammad, Ali and Fatima. So when we speak about Imamah is of different types and of different levels, and it involves different people in different times. So it's not far to say that these 13 Imams is referring to, for example, Rasulullah and the 12 Imams after him. Or we could even say, okay, cool, this is a fabricated narration. It's an incorrect narration. It could have been a scribal error. It could have been a transmission error. It could have been anything. That doesn't mean that you discredit the entire book just because of that narration. You can understand it even from the context of the narration that possibly it was referring to Rasulullah as the first Imam of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam. And that is a meaning that we accept. Rasulullah is Imam al-Anbiya. He is the Imam of the Imams alayhi salatu wasalam. So of course Rasulullah was an Imam. Of course, if we were to mention him in 13 Imams line, that would not be anything strange at all. And another narration that he mentions is with regards to Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr, saying that he was there at the time of his father's death and he spoke to him and he said a few things. His criticism is that historically, Muhammad ibn Abu Bakr would have been too young at that time to speak to his father in the way that he spoke to him in this narration. And this is not a problem either. Because even if we say that we reject that one narration, okay, it doesn't match the content of history and we know that it's inaccurate, so what? Does that mean that the whole book is fabricated? Are we claiming that this book is the Quran and it can't have any errors in it whatsoever? Of course not. The whole book doesn't become falsified based on a scribal error or a historical inaccuracy. Like I mentioned last week, there are many, many books of hadith, even our most authentic books, that have historical inaccuracies in 1 or 2 or 3 narrations. One of the issues that scholars bring up with regards to the authenticity of this book, Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali, is the narrator that narrated it from him. So the name of that individual, as I mentioned earlier, was Aban ibn Abi Ayyash. He was a narrator that was considered to be weak by some of the scholars of Rijal. So for example, we have the statement of Ibn al-Ghadairi. He mentioned ضعيف لا يلتفت إليه. He says that he is a weak narrator and what he says is not considered. And he also believed that he was one of the people that fabricated this book, Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali. Then we also have the statement of At-Tusi, where he says, Aban ibn Abi Ayyash, Fayruz, Tabi'i, Da'if. He says that he was a Tabi'i. He lived during the time of the people that lived after the companions of Rasulullah, and that he was a weak narrator. Then we have from Allama al-Hilali. He also mentions Tabi'i, ضعيف جدا والأقوى عندي التوقف فيما يرويه. This is a very interesting opinion of al-Hilali. He says that he was a tabi'i, he lived in the generation after the Sahaba, and he was da'if jiddan. He said he was very weak in narrations. But the stronger opinion, according to me, is that I'm going to do tawaqquf upon the stuff that he narrated. Tawaqquf means that I'm not making a decision. I'm not accepting them nor rejecting them. The stuff that he narrated, he's not going to accept nor reject it. And the reason for that is because he's obviously gone through the book and he's seen that there's nothing strange in this book. There isn't anything that is particularly alarming about the book. So he would have looked at it and said, well, what he's narrated there's nothing wrong with it. So why would I make a decision to reject it, even though he considered him to be very weak? So those were the criticisms with regards to the sanad of the book. In contrast to this, we see there were many scholars of Rijal who also praised Aban ibn Abi Ayyash. From them is al-Istarabadi in his book Manhaj al-Maqal. He also says with regards to him, إني رأيت أصل تضعيفه من المخالفين من حيث التشيع. He said that I saw the mukhalifin, the Sunnis, saying that he is a da'if narrator, a weak narrator, based on the fact that he was a Shia. So when our scholars see that, they take that as praise. They say, okay, that shows that he was a Shi'i, so he's a trustworthy, so we can take from his narrations. When the Sunnis consider him to be a Shi'i and a liar, we say, okay, that means that he was definitely Shia, and we can take from his narrations. So that's the opinion of al-Istarabadi. We also see, for example, Mir Hamid Hussein in his book Istiqsa al-Ifham. We also see Sayyid al-Amin in Ayan al-Shia, which is also a very, very famous book. We see in the book of Sayyid al-Muwahid al-Abtahi, in his book Tahdhib al-Maqal, he also praises Aban ibn Abi Ayyash. We have, with regards to his praise, a statement from Sayyid al-Khunsari in his book Kashf al-Astar. And we also have a praise from Sheikh Musa al-Zanjani. So there are many scholars who have also praised Aban ibn Abi Ayyash. It's not that it is unanimous that he was a weak narrator. And for that reason, many of these scholars have accepted the trustworthiness of Aban ibn Abi Ayyash and consider Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali to be an authentic book from the perspective of sanad as well as the content of the book. With regards to the praise, with regards to the book, I want to start by narrating the hadith of the Imams ﷺ themselves praising this book. We have a narration from Imam Zayn al-Abidin ﷺ where it mentions that they took the book towards him, the Kitab of Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali, and he said, صدق Sulaym rahimahullah, هذا حديثنا كله نعرفه. He says that Sulaym spoke the truth. All of this book are hadith that we know and are from us. So that is praise from Imam Sajjad alayhi salatu wasalam with regards to this book himself. It's a ma'soom Imam speaking about it. Then we have the narration of Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam. He mentions with regards to the book, he says, من لم يكن عنده من شيعتنا ومحبينا كتاب سليم بن قيس الهلالي فليس عنده من أمرنا شيء ولا يعلم من أسبابنا شيئا وهو أبجد الشيعة وهو سر من أسرار آل محمد عليه الصلاة والسلام. Look at the heaviness and the emphasis that Imam Sadiq ﷺ speaks with. He says that from our Shia and the ones who love us, if he doesn't have this book in his house, then it is as if he doesn't have anything from our matter at all. And he doesn't know anything about us at all. And it is from the alphabet, from the preliminary books of the Shia, and it is a secret from the secrets of Al Muhammad ﷺ. Imam Sadiq ﷺ has great praise for this book. And that is why we see that the scholars of the Shia, the classical scholars of the Shia, depended on this book heavily and narrated from this book heavily. And I want to start with all of the scholars that we have spoken about so far coming up to this episode. We started with Al-Kafi, Shaykh al-Kulayni. Shaykh al-Kulayni narrated from Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali. We started again after with Al-Ghayba by Shaykh al-Nu'mani. Shaykh al-Nu'mani narrated from Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali. Al-Nu'mani goes as far to say, he says, ليس بين جميع الشيعة ممن حمل العلم ورواه عن الأئمة خلاف في أن كتاب سليم بن قيس الهلالي أصل من أكبر كتب الأصول. He says that there is no difference amongst the ulama of the Shia from those who have a level of knowledge and they narrated from the Imams. There is no disagreement among them that Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali is an asl from the usul of the Imams alayhi salatu wasalam. Those usul that we spoke about that were actually praised and stamped by Imam al-Jawad alayhi salatu wasalam, where he said that you can narrate from these usul because they are our ahadith. So Shaykh al-Nu'mani, he considers this to be from the usul. He says, وَهُوَ مِنَ الْأُصُولِ الَّتِي تَرْجَعُ إِلَيْهَا الشِّيَعَةِ. He says, this is from the usul that is returned to by the Shia. This is Shaykh al-Nu'mani speaking. Then we had, in the third episode, from Shaykh al-Saduq. Shaykh al-Saduq narrated from Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali in many of his books as well. We have narrations from Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali in the book of As-Safar, in Basair al-Darajat. We saw that Shaykh al-Mufid even narrated from Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali. Although his opinion about the transmission of the book was not good, he considered many of the narrations to have a correct meaning. And the content of the book was something that he, generally speaking, he said that generally the content of the book was acceptable. And he used to accept some of these narrations and he included them in his books. Like, for example, on his book on Al-Jamal, Kitab Al-Jamal, he narrates some of the narrations of Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali. We also had many other scholars who narrated from this book. Ali ibn Ibrahim al-Qummi, one of the greatest muhaddithin of Qum, one of the teachers of Shaykh al-Kulaini and Shaykh al-Saduq. We have, with regards to Furat al-Kufi, he also mentioned the hadith of Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali. We also have the father of Shaykh al-Saduq, Ali ibn Babwayh al-Qummi, narrating from Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali. We have Shaykh al-Majlisi narrating from Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali. We have Hur al-Amili narrating from Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali. So many scholars considered this book to be an authentic source of information, and many of them relied upon it because all of the content within it was not questionable. This was content that is known to the Shia. This is the Abjad al-Shia. This is the preliminary book of the Shia. This is not something that is strange to us. If we go through it, all of the trajectory are things that we are already familiar with. So like I said with regards to Tafsir Imam Hassan Askari, it is the same conclusion. It doesn't matter whether Aban ibn Abi Ayyash was a trustworthy individual. It doesn't matter whether Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali was actually his name or if it wasn't his name. And it was, of course, but it doesn't matter. What matters is what can we learn from this book? What can we benefit from this book? And what we can benefit from this book is major, is amazing. It includes many narrations with regards to wilaya, with regards to the oppression that happened upon Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam, with regards to political governance, with regards to social issues, with regards to the fadail of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. It has many narrations with regards to many different aspects of the religion. The sermons of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam before he goes to Karbala. It has a level of detail that we don't find in any other historical work. And the best thing about it is that it is a first-hand account of somebody that was actually there when this stuff was happening. Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali. May Allah have mercy upon him and grant him ajr for the book that he wrote. And inshallah, may we benefit from it and learn from it to be able to expose the enemies of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam from the first Saqifa and from the second Saqifa of the Imam of our time. Inshallah, I hope that has been a beneficial episode, and I hope that this series in general has been beneficial, because one of the main aims of Jum'ah night was to actually familiarize our audience with the books of Hadith, the classical books of Hadith, Al-Kafi, Al-Ghayba, Kamaluddin wa Tamam al-Ni'ma, and books like these, Kitab Sulaym ibn Qays al-Hilali, Basair al-Darajat, all the other books that I have mentioned, Tafsir al-Qummi, Al-Ayashi, the books that we have brought in our previous episodes, and we've spoken from them and we've narrated from them. Inshallah, this is giving you insight into the books of the classical scholars and the books that existed at the time. Inshallah, I hope that it has been a beneficial series, and please do let me know your feedback with regards to each of the episodes that we have done. Leave your comments in the comment section. Inshallah, next week we're going to be starting a new series with regards to Khidma al-Husayniyah, the service of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, and inshallah that will be leading up to the period of Arba'een, and we'll have 2 episodes with regards to that. So I'll see you again inshallah next week when we'll be starting our new series. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.